Okay, I'm gonna make a video about my mysterious family heritage and history. It's extremely controversial because my family probably won't agree with what I'm saying. Um, Easy to prove. A lot of stuff is very easy to prove. Like once you look for it, it's easy to prove. So why am I bringing this out? Why this is pretty personal. This is actually a pretty personal thing to put out in public. Well, there is no other way to do it. So if I were to go, to each family member and explain all this. There's a lot to explain. Even right now, I'm just explaining the basis of it. If I explain things, it would it would anger my family members and anger, and some embarrassment is going to be caused and so forth and so forth, and I'll just be arguing with my family. Now, one thing that's got to be taken notice of is our family is not cohesive. It's not. We don't have a close family. Okay, that doesn't mean that we don't love each other, but we are very, very distant from each other. Now, I'll give you an example. I hadn't talked to my nephew Eric in I don't know how long, months and months and months, maybe a year. I hadn't talked to my own brother. I talked to him on the phone once or twice a year, and just never, we don't see each other, and it's the same thing with my sisters and in the suburbs and so forth. We simply, I mean, for an inner family, supposedly brother and sister, brothers and sisters, we really are very distant. But that distance didn't come about like the way other people's families, they grow distant, and other people have families where they grow distant. We were never close to begin with. I was never close to my brother. I was never close to my sisters. Nobody. I was pretty close to my nephew at one point. But I really, as soon as we were turned teenagers, we really, really, really started living separate lives almost immediately, like from like a pre-adolescent. Like when I was 12 years old, I already had different friends. My brother had different friends. My sister had different friends, so forth. I was the youngest of the bunch, so you know what they say, shit rolls downhill. So I was like totally not into the groups that they were with. So unlike other families that grow apart, our family was separated very early on. Now that sounds kind of offensive to people because you think, well, we don't care about each other. No, we do care about each other, but the face the fact. I had no idea what my sister Gina was doing in her teenage years, or Linda was doing in her teenage, or even my brother. My brother's only 1 year away from me. I don't even know what he was doing, and we were living in the same house. All right. So at a very, very early stage, my inner family was never close. If someone would say, "Oh, I was close to Riddle, we were close," they're lying. I was never close to none of my family. We each other had each other's. We all had each other's groups of friends and different type of goals and so forth. And but we loved each other. So that's for sure. But I needed to bring this out for something, for that you can understand why we didn't. Why are so many red flags missed? Because I have an extraordinary family heritage. It's extraordinary. The problem with it is that not only is it extraordinary, it's frightening, and it's taboo, and it's very, very disturbing, man. And when I started finding out, after my mother Doreen Morales and my father Mr. Pete, had passed on, I uh, I started noticing things were not clicking. I started thinking about some of the things they said about other people when they were either drunk or angry or whatever, and or when they were sick, they told me certain things, and they were weird things. They were like weird secrets that didn't really add up. I thought they were just saying it because they were disturbed at the point. So anyway, I had written a small article about the family history that clears up the family history. As strange as it may seem and unbelievable as it may seem, it's actually true. The reason why I'm talking about it in this blog and why I wrote it is because I really don't have a choice, because no one else is going to be able to write it. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about so I can make this really clear. So if I were to die or something, okay, this history would never be revealed. Nobody will reveal it. It'll be gone forever because nobody has the writing skills to do it, and they're also no one has has the balls to do it, because what it does is you have to skip over being embarrassed about things, and you have to skip over some frightening things, because there's things that were frightening in the past that are still frightening in the modern day. So even more frightening in the modern day. And I'll get to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take I'm going to read some of the article that I wrote, because I'm going to write a book in the future. I'm going to write a book about this in the future, but it's probably going to take a little bit of time for me to get my head straight on this. This is really hard to do. So psychologically and emotionally, that's what I mean. But first of all, I want to make we got to make a kind of clearer deposition here. So there was a woman named Beth who set up an Ancestry.com account, and her and another woman named Margie, who's supposedly my sister. They're not my sisters, by the way. They're my cousins, but they thought they were. And so they set up an Ancestry.com account because we just discovered each other. We never knew of each other's presence. So I found, like another brother and sisters, not supposedly from the internet. And then, we met at Pepe's and stuff. We all met over there. And later on, she was, she was more of a, because she was a nurse, and she's from Downers Grove and all that. So, I think that she kind of felt she was a little bit more intelligent than everybody from the ghetto. And so she took it upon herself to kind of organize it. Little did she know that I had long been doing this even before that. That's how I found her. I found her. She didn't find me. I found her. So that just goes to show you that I've been digging into the family history for a long time. So my family history version, it's very disturbing, but it is true. That's it. So she had made a big mistake, thinking that all the children that are involved came from one woman. She thought they all came from Doreen Morales, the woman that raised me, okay, which I thought was my mother, which she still is my mother. She's the one who raised me, and of course Mr. Pete is my father. So she thought that everybody came from these two guys, Ken Rick and Pedro Morales and Doreen Morales. And if that's the case, you would have to have babies every year since her adult life, every single year. And then some of the babies would die, and then some of them she would adopt out, as if she didn't learn her lesson. She just had babies and somehow this would be hidden. Somehow all these pregnancies would be hidden, and so forth and so forth. So we're talking about, if Beth's story was correct, she would have had to have sold some babies, literally sold them, then adopted some babies out, and then one after the other, 1 year after the other, and then also somehow, some way, keep them hidden and have the birth certificate names changed and altered. All right. Right away, I found out this is very silly. And the reason why it's silly, because it's not true. Now, unfortunately, the truth is actually more disturbing than Beth's crazy freaking story. The reason why Beth didn't recant those stories was because she spent a lot of money. She put money into airfare and went down to Tennessee. Yeah, paid people's airline tickets to go meet her estranged family, and told them this story. She assumed her story was correct, and so she went. Now she goes, well, I'm also Hispanic too. I'm part Puerto Rican. And she told everybody, in her family and about everybody else, whatever. And you would think that was a good thing, and it was for a while. But the problem is that Beth's story made my parents look horrible. But I accepted it at that time, because I didn't have everything just right yet, So I accepted it at that time. But then I started noticing that it was really bad when it came to my mother Doreen and so forth, thinking that she. In other words, she was blaming my mother and my father, the ones that raised me, for their, 3 or 4 people being adopted. In other words, they were the boogeyman. They were just poor people, and they couldn't make ends meet, and they sold some babies, not even adopted them, sold them, man. And and my parents, Doreen and Pedro, were dead at this time, long dead by this time, in the grave, and they can't defend themselves. And I thought to myself, gee whiz, something's horribly wrong about her story. None of the stories, I just heard her kind of yap on it. And I go, I looked at Ancestry.com because they got an account. Ancestry.com is almost completely wrong. There's a guy in there that has nothing to do with, we're not even related to, So what I did is I go, well, I'm going to keep it down until I get all the facts straight. And then when I got the facts straight, I told her, I said, hey man, you got to give me a call. I got to talk to you in person, because I'm sorry that you spent all that money and you told a whole bunch of people your side of the story, but your story is completely wrong. Okay? She didn't go that way. She wanted to keep up with the story that's bad, demonizing my parents anyway, and demonizing the rest of the family. And also, she didn't want to tell the truth about it, because she probably is going to find out that the truth of our family history is very dark. It's very dark and scary, man. And it's also very embarrassing to certain people, because of certain weird taboo stuff. Very embarrassing. So she wanted to stick with her story, the false, and I can't do that. Man, come on, man. I'm part of why the family's the way it is. So besides all the cryptid talk, let's talk about the article. Okay, so I wrote an article. It's called "The Family Doomed to Be Divided." Okay, you could kind of figure out what that title means. We're doomed to be divided. Even though I'm talking clearly right now, even after this blog and everybody knows what's going on, we're still doomed to be divided. There's not, they're not going to not like what I say, and so forth. And then there's a lot of different groups there, who follow my family, because my family is very popular. And unfortunately, they're considered occult icons and so forth. So there's a lot of people who get misinformed. I had a problem with some Gold Coast psychologists who were slandering me, slandering my daughter, slandering my family, slandering my biological mother, slandering the mother who raised me, telling all kind of lies because they don't get the story straight, And that's hard to live with. So now I got that settled. So the story that needs to be told, okay, for anyone who's interested, because there's a lot of people who find the craft work and everything that we do in our family history and activism, they have a tie with that. So let's start this out. Okay, so I got the title as "A Family Doomed to Be Divided," and I just put it in parentheses as a future book project, because I intend to make a book project about this. Now I'm going to stop right here and I tell you why I'm doing this, why the blog is. Okay, so I had a stroke last year, and it was a pond stroke. It's kind of hard for me to talk about it. I got a little PTSD about that. And so it was a hemorrhagic stroke. It was a blood vessel that busted out. I had high blood pressure all my life, because I have very bizarre genetics. My genes are very unusual. Okay, and that has to do with my parents and so forth. But I was there. They said I was going to die. Say my goodbyes and so forth. I was during the time of COVID, so my family couldn't come by. I was calling Belinda. I was calling everybody. I was calling my granddaughter, my stepchildren, my children. I don't consider them stepchildren. I consider them children. Calling Melissa and Rocky and everybody. Thinking I'm going to die. I had this really hardcore neurologist come down and say, hey, if you don't stop bleeding, you're not going to make it. Okay, so that's one thing. Then I got over that. I got to be careful about that. It's always going to be a threat. But I also had some other problems that I didn't know about for the last 20 years. And it was only found out when I took that test. And it's what it is I got a disease called VBD. It's really a condition, not a disease. So a lot of people sometimes get the condition, but I have it very, very bad for someone that's as young as I am. And what that is vascular brain disorder. So what happens with this is that there's not like a stroke, like a hemorrhagic stroke when it busted out. What happens is that blood flow stops in my brain, and so parts of my brain, they lose circulation from the blood flow. They lose that circulation and oxygen, and small parts of my brain literally die. So I have brain damage, considerable brain damage, and it explains a lot of things over the last 20 years. Now it's too bad I didn't find that out until last year, but insurance and so forth, I couldn't see specialists. They didn't pay for that. I couldn't get an MRI. So I'm mad about it. Yeah, because if I knew about it, I would have been able to do something. So what is the point? What does it got to do with what I'm talking about? It has a lot to do with what I'm talking about, because it has to do about what I'm saying now. So basically, the guy's like, you know what? It's you know, in other words, he's just like, you probably got around 11, you know, you got 7 to 11 years to live an active life. Then after 11 years or 7 years, then we'll see from there. So okay, all right. So my mom Doreen died when she was 60 years old, and I thought that was pretty young. I'm 50. I'll be 52, and they're saying that I basically, my brain is going to run out of its juice, run out of its being able to function around 7 to 11 years. Now at that time I'll be maybe 63, or so I would probably die around the same time as my mother died. Um, so what does this got to do with the blog? It has a lot to do with it because um, I want to get the record straight. As strange and bizarre as it is, there's a lot of wonderful things about my parents, both all the sides of my families, really truly fascinating things, and just extraordinary talents and so forth, and activism and everything. People look at some of the bad things, some of the very strange. Don't look at the bizarre, scary things, and then it kind of overshadows these wonderful talents and things, and fantastic activism and all these other things that they do, and that's a big mistake. So let's get on to it. So I'm writing down, and I go, well, my entire family comes from 3 very secretive and eccentric sisters. They are Anita Case, Doreen Morales, and Fantasma Yorick. Okay, so here we go. This is really the key of unlocking my family's secrets, is those 3. Because nobody knew that Anita Case or Fantasma Yorick existed, despite the fact they were here. So, as children, they met these people. I mean, they were not exactly, foreign. Fantasma Yorick, which is probably my biological mother, I'm pretty sure, I'd probably say 100% by now, lived she literally lived next door to my house twice. When I was on 23rd and Sawyer, she lived next door. And then when I lived on 19th and 11th, she lived next door. And she would go visit my mother and her friends, and they called her Fatima. Fatima. They thought she was Mexican. She was a gypsy and Swede. She was a half Romanian, half Swedish woman. That's how I know some of the language, because we always used to jibber jabber when we come back, because they said she was my godmother, and so my mother was pretty not very affectionate back in there, and she was very affectionate. I mean, Fatima was very affectionate. She took care of me very well, but she would go back and forth and buy me things and take me to the flea market and buy me books, teach me about reptiles and amphibians, and I'd go by her house. I'd stay for 1 or 2 days over there at a time. I'd be waiting for her to come home and all that. But she was a strange woman. I thought that she was going to try to, my mother was like, hey, she's going to take you to be try to be a Catholic, or I thought that I was going to be taking me to be some kind of Catholic, maybe communion ritual. But my mother was a phantasmagoric. The one I'm talking about, her was a Wakani witch. I didn't know that as a child, and she was inducting me into that culture. When I was a kid. When you're a kid, you don't know anything. I was very innocent. I didn't know anything, but she treated me well, extremely well, more than anybody in my family, flat out. She was a very powerful woman, man. She had a lot of influence over aldermen. She had a lot of influence over business owners, and she had a lot of influence over corporations that had a lot of money. And she owned a house, and she had owned a business and a cafe in Irving Park and Melrose Park, to which she ended up giving to her older sister, which is Doreen Morales, the one that I've always thought was my mother, who is really my mom, because she's the one who raised me. Okay, so there's 2 women that were totally ignored. They didn't know about them, and that is Anita Case, the older sister to Doreen Rosengren, which is my mom, Doreen Morales, and then a much younger sister, a half sister, is Fantasma Yorick. Okay, they're all Swedes. They're all Swedish. Anita Case, the name Case is not really even Case. It's Gazie. It's a Swedish. It's actually a Swedish name. Just say Case because it's in English. And so what Beth and those people, when they did Ancestry.com, what they didn't take into account is that all the children are from these 3 sisters. Okay, that's the big secret. That was the key to unlock everything. But all they kept on, trying to say that it was only from one woman. In other words, Doreen Morales, the one that raised me, somehow, some way had, oh my gosh, 10 or 11 children, one after the other, maybe more, maybe even up to 14 children. One after the other, and then somehow kept it secret. So nobody knew that she had more than four or five kids. But according to Beth and the other side of the family, because they did not know about the other two sisters, they thought that that was their mom, and she was just poor and she adopted them out, and she was the one responsible for them being adopted. That's not true. What really happened was that Anita Case, her older sister, had children. She had 3 children, and those children were Marge, Beth, and Peter. And those children were fathered by a guy named Ken Rick, who also fathered Karen and Doris. So they have the same father and everything. It would show up in the DNA. They try to say it didn't, but no. When you got to do when you do a paternity test, you got to be mitochondrial and what's the word? In other words, paternal. Okay. And Ancestry.com, they say they do those things. They're not doing it. I looked it up. As a matter of fact, Beth and all them were saying, "Oh no, I'm definitely from Pedro Morales because I'm Hispanic." I go, "Where do you get this idea from?" So I go, "I looked at your Ancestry.com. You think you're Hispanic because they said you're Iberian, isn't it?" She goes, "Yeah, Iberian is Hispanic." No, it's not. They dedicated a whole page on Ancestry.com explaining that Iberian and Hispaniola are from Spain, and Iberian is from Spain. Go Google it yourself and find out what it is. So I told her, no, for you to be Hispanic, you have to be Afro-Caribbean or Indigenous Caribbean or Indigenous American. She is none of them. Okay, she's not. That means that Mr. Pete, the Puerto Rican guy, my father, is not her father. Period. That's it. She don't want to accept that. So let them believe what they want to believe. Okay, let's go on to this other thing. So I talk about the 3 sisters. I go, but me and my inner family only knew one mother, Doreen Morales. I just explained that. Okay, this is because her older sister, Anita Case, and her much younger half-sister, Fantasma Yorick, got into quite a bit of controversial trouble in the past. Okay, so Anita Case and Fantasma Yorick had to live sort of secretive lives. Okay, they all had problems with law, bizarre family obligations, and unstable citizenship. Okay, let me tell you exactly what I'm talking about. So, my mother, Doreen, the one that raised me, Doreen, my mom, she was always 1 year younger than my dad. Okay, now somewhere along the line, when I was a teenager, she changed this. What the f is going on here? Now you're saying that you're the same age as my dad when you were always 1 year younger. And but yeah, that's what it was. So I remember we'd get on a bus and we'd go to the Social Security office that was on Sacramento, and I was wondering why she had to keep updating her Social Security card. All right, that was the first red flag. And what this was is because my mother, Doreen, was not born in the United States. She was born in Canada. As a matter of fact, she was born in Montreal, Canada. And she was not 33, and she was born in 1933. She was born a year younger, younger. So, but she had to get the Social Security updated because they had to get her citizenship corrected. My biological mother, Fantasma, had a horrible problem with citizenship because she was never made it as a full citizen. She was a lot younger than my mother, and what happened is that she was well, yeah, she was an illegal alien, I guess, because her visas would be revoked because she overstayed her visa, and so they would take it back. And then when she got in trouble, she would get in trouble for this activism. She was a Wakani cultist and so forth. She did a lot of activism. Some of them things, they would piss off older men and so forth. And this is, by the way, a problem how Anita Case disappeared. So my 2 sisters were both, they were both feminist. They would, lesbians go back and forth. And, being a lesbian back in the days in You know, in the 1950s and 40s, you know, that was taboo. You had you're going to start seeing there's a lot of reasons why they kept things secret, and both of them were witchy poofs. They were witches. I mean, real life witches. They had a practice of craft, a psychological witchcraft, obsidian witchcraft, a lot of stuff that I practice today. And you got to figure that at the time, when, you know, during their environment at that time, the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s and stuff, it was looked upon very, very harshly by conservatives. And of course, when they were doing their feminine activisms, you know, they were, you know, continuing the campaigns of their grandparents, like Sybil Carnett and Karen Page, you know, hardcore feminists from the 20s and so forth. And aldermen didn't like that. So they got into some huge political problems. Okay. And my mother, Phantasmagoric, would be incarcerated into a mental institution that has a long line of terrorizing my family all the way since the 1900s through 1920s, 30s, 40s, a long history that now gone. An asylum called Dunning Asylum, which is Chicago State Hospital, which today is Chicago Reed Hospital. A lot of my family get incarcerated and get wrongly incarcerated and get thrown into this institution because they are stirring up trouble with aldermen and businessmen and so forth who find their activism ruins their plans, which is thousands and thousands of dollars, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes get messed up when they protest against a landfill, or they protest against the women not getting paid for their corporations. There's a lot of stuff that Phantasmagoric and Anita Case did that they really rubbed some people the wrong way. This is where we get into the scary part, okay? So, of course, they're cultists on top of it, and you know they, you know, the right-wing conservative Christians and those people who are supporting them, you know, attacked them, and in Anita's case, they got rid of her. They locked up Anita Case in Dunning Asylum, and they never let her out. She was there when she was pregnant. The problem with them is there's a trail that you can go to the Department of Human Services, and after a while you will find her admittance forms and all that where she was in Dunning. And of course she writes down who's their relative on those forms, and they are Doreen Morales, you know, Phantasmagoric, you know, different people. And that's how you prove they exist. Now, where is Anita Case right now? Well, Anita Case is still here. She's in Chicago, but she's dead. She's been dead for a very, very long time, and she was probably killed in the institution and buried in Dunning Asylum. Now, what makes this more frightening and obscure, in other words, this is the reason why people don't want to talk about these things, is because Dunning has a truly mass grave. Dunning Asylum has a mass grave, and when I'm saying mass grave, I truly mean mass grave. So there's thousands of bodies from, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of years, thousands of bodies. The last count was 28,000 when I checked. When my mother is the one who blew the whistle on those graves, on the people being buried there on Phantasmagoric, because she escaped. She used her witchcraft ways and escaped the asylum, then went straight to some of the good aldermen she knew, and then they hired people like Barry Flagg and so forth to actually go and find out if these mass graves were real, and indeed they discovered them in 1989 and so forth. And nobody wants to take credit for these horrible things. It sounds like a comic book story because it's incredible. There's nothing like this in the world today. And they're finding more and more. The last count was 38. There was 10,000 more since the last time she blew the whistle on Dunning. So why don't people know about this? Why isn't this like front page news? Well, I just told you. There's a lot of, you know, a lot of Chicago politicians. No one was ever arrested for this. You know, they're saying they change administrations, they change the name of the hospital to Chicago Reed. They do all kind of things, but there's still bodies there. As a matter of fact, they were building a school there, and they can't even build the school because there's thousands of bodies underneath the ground. So, you know, it looks like a horror story, like you see Poltergeist. Remember the old movie Poltergeist, or you know, some kind of ghost story where, but it's real, and it's far worse than the actual fiction. So it's worse than the ghost stories. And people don't want to talk about it. You know, it's kind of like the Spanish flu. Nobody really like what, you know, after people got sick with COVID, they go, how come I don't know about the Spanish flu? When something horrible happens and it's sickening and it's gross and it's strange, people they don't want to talk about it. But a lot of people were mistreated. You know, like the Dunning was far worse than Willowbrook in New York. You know, and not only that, when they killed, you know, they would lock you up for being an alcoholic or something, and never let you go, or like if you were a problem person, like my mother and Anita Case, you know, her older sister were problematic. They killed Anita Case and probably killed her, and they buried her. So the official case that they say that she's missing. I go, do you know what happened to her? About what year? Well, she disappeared in this year, and well, what happened? Well, there were 107 people that disappeared in that year, in Dunning. 107 people in just 1 year. So there's weird stuff going on in Dunning Asylum, you know, in 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Okay. Oh, so okay, so we're gonna knock out some of that scary part there. So she's probably in the mass grave with a whole bunch of other people, because her admittance form and all that, it stops within I think it's I forgot the year, but it stops within that year, and so they never said she died or anything. She's just gone. But she was never released. So if she was never released, she just got lost like 107 other people during that year. You know, and of course, you know, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what happened. So that person is the mother of Beth, Peter, and Marge. So their mother is still in the mass grave at Dunning Asylum to this day. They could go look for her and try to pick her up. Maybe there's some kind of restitution for that nowadays. I don't know. But they never want to admit that. Well, what is the reason they wouldn't want to admit that? Well, they wouldn't want to admit that for two big reasons. Number one, these people are kind of posh. You know, Beth and all them living, you know, in western suburbs out there, past, you know, Lyle and Downers Grove and all that area. And they grew up in a way where they grew up in a real conservative Christian family. Nobody wants to say, "Hey, I found my biological mother. She's buried in a mass grave. She was into witch. She was a lesbian. She was a lesbian witch, and she caused problem with the state, and they killed her, and they just buried her in a mass grave." You know, you think they want to admit that after they just told their story, their nice story that, oh, my mother was Hispanic and so forth, and she was you know, come on, that's a horror story. Nobody wants to admit that, but that's the truth. That's what happened. Okay, for me, I'm a freaking warlock. I'm part of that culture. So because I'm part of that culture, that's something to be revered and fascinated. You know, if you see a woman that, let's say whether she got sick and they buried her there, or whether she was killed or whatever, one thing's for sure: they locked her up because she was an activist. She was a feminist. She was an activist. She was a lesbian too. She was a lesbian and bisexual. She obviously she had kids from had the kids, but she was probably a very extraordinary, fascinating woman. You know, the Anita Case. And my mother, Phantasmagoric, not only was she was extraordinary, fascinating, she shut down Dunning Asylum. She shut the place down. She walked out naked from Dunning Asylum. You know, with some kind of mind tricks like a Jedi, but not all that way. It just took a long time to convince people to be on your side and say, hey, you know what, you know, it'll be, if you do this for me, just leave this door open at one time. Just stuff like that. Just by the power of influence, you know, with a lot of psychological tricks. Not it's not like you're a freaking Jedi. You could control someone's mind, but you can influence people. So she was in there for 8 months only. She was only in there for 8 months, and she was able to influence people and get them to do some things that she wanted. Matter of fact, they had to isolate her because she was converting people that were in the ward. Yeah. And she did this also in Sunderland Asylum, where she got out real quick in Florida. So she used her experience of there and Dunning, and she was not only successful that when she escaped, she had found out that there were mass graves and all that. When she escaped, she told a couple of aldermen that were influential to her that, hey, you got a big problem that goes on for generations, and here we go. And that's why they closed down Dunning and changed the administration. That's purely phantasmagoric. Now, what's wonderful for them is they go, oh, well, you know what? We got some kind of, person that's not a citizen. She's kind of like she don't exist. She's not a real citizen. They constantly were trying to arrest her. They did arrest her. They locked her up in Dunning. She escaped. And so she's the perfect fall guy for these guys. And then what happens? They change the administration in 1989. Barry Flagg and everybody go out there and they do all this digging and they found all these horrors. So for a person supposedly they demonize someone, she did a great thing. So, how does one person take down an entire freaking asylum? Well, that was my mother for you. So these are extraordinary people. Doreen was extraordinary as well. People didn't really know a lot about it. She was very secretive. Okay, so you got Anita Case was the older sister. Then you got Doreen Rosengren, and then you got Phantasma-Yorick. Okay, so you look at all three names. You got Case, Gazier, then you got Yorick, and then you got Rosengren, which are very Swedes. They're from Swiss. When you trace that down, it's because they're all direct bloodlines from the Knights of Malta, the Synoptic Knights, the Knights Templar, and the Knights Hospitalis, and Teutonic Knights. Okay, so my grandfather, Ernest Rosengren, he was a police captain in Chicago. He was a police captain, and he got demoted because Chicago politics, man. And then you still see his badge at the precinct. He did a lot of things, a lot of stuff for the union, the police union too. So my grandfather was a police captain, and he had a lot of control for the union, but he was also a Knight Templar, okay, and had a lot of control over people like some of the Teamsters and so forth like that. So he was had his Templar name was Dark Vesuvius, like the volcano. I don't know why his last name is Vesuvius, but that's what they called him. I'm called Dark Riddlefer. The dark thing it's kind of like, you ever seen Star Wars? Here's the weird thing about this, by the way, how history works. So a lot of people are, with Dune, the movie Dune came out. So a lot of people are saying, well, Star Wars bit off of Dune and all that. No. These books, the movie Star Wars came out in the 70s. The book Dune came out in the 60s. All right. They both bit off the Shaolin monks from China, and they stole the ideas off the Shaolin monks from China and the Knights Templar. George Lucas says in the book, the Bill Moyer's book, about myth, that he bases the Jedi on the Shaolin monks. That's why you have weird names like Qui-Gon Jinn and all that. But I don't know why he did this part. He based the evil guys, Darth Maul, Darth Vader, Darth Darth and Devil, all these guys. He based them on the Knights Templar. Okay, why he based the Knights Templar are Christians? They're not evil people. I don't know why he based the Sith on. Why he based the bad guys on a Templar? I don't know why he did that. But there is something that kind of goes with it, because like my dad was Dark Vesuvius, and then my mentor, which is actually my half brother, was Dark Ripper, and so forth. So we have these nicknames. Okay, actually Sal made up my name, the Riddle, like that. But because I'm a Templar, when I got graduated, I learned enough skill. They gave me the title, because Dark is a title. Dark just simply means it means drone adept representing knighthood. That's what Dark means. That's drone back in the days. It does not like a drone that flies. Drone means it's like an ant warrior. Like when the ant has drones, Or let me give an example. In other words, just a person who's learning, and then once they learn, they take a title. That's what the word drone meant back in the days, all the way to medieval days. So dark is an acronym. Actually, it's a title. Dark simply means drone adept, a person learning, representing knighthood. Okay, that's where you get the acronym dark. So once you gain a certain amount of skill, you get the title. That just sticks with you forever. So it was the same thing with my grandfather, Dark Vesuvius, Dark whatever. Okay, so then you have all these fiction stuff. My sister's Veno Jesuit witch. That means a person from the Ursulines, with like a nun from the Ursulines, who really couldn't get into Ursulines but kept their doctrine. They're called very rare called Veno Jesuits. You look at Dune, they got Bene Gesserit witch. Come on, where do you think they got that from? Come on, I mean, these orders that that I'm in, they're easily 900 years old. They're in the First Crusades. So the craft work in occult is very old. And then when you mix all this stuff with the family history, and then you mix the people that you were going against and deal with, it gets, oh my gosh, it gets really deep and dark and scary. And the reason why it gets really deep, dark, and scary is because it's true. That's the thing. So when you find out, you go, oh, I don't know, this guy's got to be lying about Dunning Asylum. They can't be 28,000 people, whatever. And then you find out it's true, then you start thinking, oh my God, this is horrible. Like as if we're responsible for that. We're not responsible for that, but we're associated with it, And then you go, well, I heard a Knight Templar. You see stupid Tom Hanks movies. The fuck is that? Tom Hanks moving a bunch of retarded films that have nothing to do with the Knights Templar, but they're always putting Knights Templars as these horrible people. Devil worshippers and Baphomet and all that. That's a bunch of shit. Knights Templars are Christians. We worship the historical Christ. You can see it in all the work I do on the internet. You see me writing stuff. I got enemies that are religious fanatics, and then I got enemies that are hardcore atheists. Some of them I'm friends with, But really, that's why they're always attacking me, because I get attacked on both extreme fronts. Anyway, so it's familial. That means that it's family rooted. Okay. So then I write over here that these issues forced them to live very secret lives. Some of these problems led to their incarceration, we just talked about that, and their deportation, which left Doreen to care for her sister's children, namely me and my extended family. So in that paragraph, I'm explaining that because they're very eccentric ways, and a lot of their things rub the law the wrong way, they don't get what they want. For example, my mother never really gets situated as a citizen, and she gets deported to Serbia. Okay, because she had family in Serbia, even though she's a Swede. She talks Serbian as well, and that's why there's a lot of people in Serbia named Jurek, because there's an outcropping from Sweden. So Jurek is really a Swedish name. So Anita Case is born. Anita Case, her older sister, is born in the United States, though she's not foreign. Anita Case is not foreign. But my mother Doreen is, and so a lot of times when the police would come by, she would take the name of Anita Case. And now this is where a lot of the birth certificates get messy, because on those birth certificates for a number of kids is not Doreen, is Anita Case. And what they do is they mix their names back and forth. One child has one father's name, one child has Pedro's name, another kid has Ken Rick's name, another person has Anita Case. So you got 3 women, and then you got 3 men. Now the odd thing about it is these 3 women and these 3 men, they're really, really loyal to each other. So even though Doreen was with both Ken Rick and Pedro Morales, she keeps that relationship up with both guys for over 25 years, at the very least. So she's probably keeping up their same relationship with these 2 guys for maybe the excess of 40 years, 40. And, my mother, had, bizarre relationship with Viridian Cruz. Viridian Cruz is the half-brother of Pedro. And see, this is where the incest stuff comes into play, because people think they're incestuous, but that's not the case. What's really happening is that my Pedro Morales, the husband of Doreen, his family is from Puerto Rico. And while my grandfather had businesses, he started some businesses in Puerto Rico trying to import coconuts and pineapples and yams and all that stuff in the 1930s, you know, when my father wasn't even born. And then later on, when he got older, they started working. They started working for him. And that's how a matter of fact, that's how he met Doreen. How Mr. Pete, my dad Pete, met my mother Doreen, because when he came to Chicago, he was looking up on properties that they had, which was the cafe in Melrose Park and Irving Park, and the muffler shop in Irving Park. You know, see what they could have as far as ownership when they died. And when they go over there, they go, oh well, my family used to work for your family, and so they hook up. But because they have such close family ties, because my dad's family worked in Puerto Rico for the Rosengrens, you know, the Morales and Cruz worked for Rosengrens, it seems like it's incestuous, like they're related, but they're actually not related. Their family just worked for them during the 30s and 40s and so forth. So you can see how confusing it gets. Extremely confusing. So unless you know what's going on, unless you know where to look, and of course you see that. That's where the reason why you go on Ancestry.com. You go to Puerto Rico looking, you're expecting to find a bunch of Moraleses. Oh, you know, my dad came over there with Tom. You know, they came to Florida first, picking oranges with the job. Then they end up, you know, going to New York for a while. That's why my dad has sisters in New York. And then they go to, they end up in Chicago. The reason why they end up in Chicago is because the people they used to work for was my grandfather on my mother's side, and so, you know, that's where they end up hooking up and staying there and merging as a family. You know, so that explains that. You know what I mean? A lot of people, it wasn't by coincidence. You know, they would have probably just stood back in freaking Florida, just closer to Puerto Rico, but they stood in Chicago because there were properties here that end up getting dissolved. You know, by who knows what, maybe the state or something. But the whole point is they came for property and end up staying for love, I guess, because they hooked up with each other. Now the thing about it is that, like with Beth and all, they were saying, well, my parents were poor. Well, I always thought they were poor too when I grew up, because by the time I was born in 1970, and by 1970, when I was growing up, from what I know, we lived in low-income neighborhoods, which was a Pilsen and Little Village, but they were not poor. In their earlier days, when they were teenagers and so forth, they were actually fairly well off because they had properties and they owned houses. Now, what happened to them? That's a debate. I'm pretty sure I know what happened, but I'm not going to get into it. So they lived wealthy lives when they were younger, and then they end up getting poor. You know, as time went on. So that's what happened with them. So, like I'm saying in this thing, these issues forced them to live very secretive lives, and some of these problems led to incarceration. We already covered that. So this was a big dark secret for their entire lives until just a few years ago, and it led to my family being broken into 3 groups that had hardly ever known of each other's existence. Okay, let me explain that sentence. Okay, so my family, from all this past dark history, gets split up into 3 groups. Okay, all right. So these 3 groups are as follows. These are those born from the fathers, Ken Rick, we just talked about Ken Rick, Pedro Morales, my dad, Mr. Pete, we still sell beer together and stuff, and Viridian Cruz. Viridian Cruz is my biological dad. Okay. Now, those born from Ken Rick are what I call schism children, the ones who were adopted out. These children were broken apart by adoption because Doreen could no longer care for her older sister, Anita Case's children, as she was too busy having her own. What does that mean? That means that when Anita Case was locked up in Dunning Asylum, she could never get back out. She was such a troublesome person for these evil-ass people in the state. They wanted to keep her locked up, and so she couldn't get out of Dunning. Okay? Now, you can tell this because when she's locked up in Dunning, it tells the years. When you look up her records when she's in Dunning Asylum, and they are the years that these children are born. So basically, she had the babies, and then they go and they grab her and lock her up again. So she's trying to live a normal life, and she's not able to slip charges. She can't slip these charges. So she would have the babies, and what would happen is that, you know, they would keep arresting her and throwing her in an asylum because she can't get rid of these charges. You know, in one case, she has a baby literally and then she has a baby in the hospital, gives it to the family, and then they take her back to the asylum. So my mother Doreen, the one who raised me, Doreen, she was getting confusing again. Not my biological mother, my mother Doreen, actually raised those children for a while, and then of some she overseen some of the adoption with her sister, and the other ones she tried to raise. She tried to raise them, and she couldn't because she was having her own children at the time. It was too much of her, too much of a financial burden, and too much of a psychological burden because it was just her dad and her. Also, there was questions of who the father was because Doreen was still seeing the same women. I mean, Doreen. She was seeing the same men. My fault. That's Ken Rick and Pedro Morales. And my dad was probably wondering, I wonder whose these are. Some of them have my name on a birth certificate, but I know they're not. And Ken Rick would do the same. Well, these kids are not mine. They're from this Puerto Rican guy, Pedro. And so they start going back and forth, bickering about whose children are who, which is going to happen if you spend 40 years with the same two men. That's going to happen. Okay. And back in those days, they didn't have DNA tests and so forth. All right, so eventually she adopts those 3 children now, and that explains it. So they want to know, oh my God, who's the evil one? Doreen must be the evil one. Doreen ain't the evil one. She tried to raise her sister's kids, but she couldn't do it because she started having her own kids, started to have her own children. She couldn't do this anymore, and she adopted them out simply for that fact. And so as much as they demonized her, she was actually helping them, not hurting them. So that was a valued thing. In other words, with valued and valor. But she doesn't get any credit. She's demonized by these people. Okay, so then those that are born from Pedro Morales, I call inner circle because these are the ones I was actually raised with. I was raised with these people, and they are Julie, Mark. A lot of people don't know that. Mark Morales, Mark Hazarat. Okay, now my father told me about Mark. He told me when we lived together. He goes, I had a son. His name was Mark Morales. He's 8 years older than you. Lo and behold, my mentor is Mark Hazarat. Before they call him Mark Hazarat, Mark Reynolds. Mark Hazarat, who just popped up in my life. Forced me to join the temple. He forced me to do that. By the way, I was a kid when I was like freaking 15. And he's 8 years older than me, and that I found out later on. That's my brother, my half brother. So that's Mark. So from Pedro Morales, we got Julie, Mark, Gina, Linda, and Papo. Those are from Pedro Morales. Okay, now those born from Viridian Cruz, I call occult children, being as how they are born under the Templar and Wukani cults. Okay, so in other words, they're sponsored by these cults. The Templar out there in Wisconsin, and they're Templar in Tinley Park and so forth, and New Orleans and all that. So they sponsor some of the families. So do corporate, so does Monsanto and MacArthur and all this. So we have a lot of financial gains that are entrusted to these corporations and so forth that we help mediate with, and because of that. We get quartered by these organizations, which is the Templar and the Wukani. And these people are, so those born under Viridian Cruz, from Viridian Cruz, are Lauren Prose, Lauren Rebecca Prose, that's me, and then me, Jesus Morales, and then Leonora Gloria Contreras. So that's Lauren the Red, me, Dark Riddle, and then my younger sister, Dark Sable, who lives on the north side. She lives in Wicker Park. And, Lauren the Red, she goes back and forth. She's a activist, works with the Catholics, back in Guatemala and so forth. Okay, so where did these girls come from? So my family would be like, well, these, I never heard about these girls. Well, you should have, because they live next door. Okay, so when I lived on 2240, they were my best friends. I had no idea they were my sisters, because that was kept from me, But they were my best friends. We used to hang out with Thelma and Amy and Esther, little Esther, and all that back in, whatever. But they were my best friends. When my brother had his own friends, my sisters had, like I said before, everybody had their own friends. So they probably know who they are. They've seen them around. They live next door, but my sisters were too busy doing their own things, and my brother's too busy doing his own things. They hanging around with a guy named Hippie. Their brother was Hippie. So they called him. So we used to we were all coagulated, except that, because we lived our own lives as children, we didn't really pay too much attention. I had no idea that my best friends were my sisters. That would later on cause me a hell of a lot of problems when I got older. But that's the fact. Now, when I found that out, that really hurt me. Now, I'm still a little bit hurt by it. I found out about that a long time ago, but it hurt me a lot because my parents. First of all, I always identified with being Latino. But that's unfortunately when I had 3 DNA tests, and I'm not Latino. I'm actually I thought it was Puerto Rican because I thought Pedro was my dad because he raised me, and he is not my dad, but I'm related to him because his younger half brother is my biological dad. So I actually look like Pedro, like Mr. Pete, the guy who raised me, my dad. I consider him my dad because he raised me, and I'm actually related to him. I'm very closely related. Instead of him, I'm his. I guess I'm his nephew, not his son. But that explains why we look like each other. Well, and also the one who raised me, Doreen, is actually my aunt. And it seems like it's incestuous because you think they're related. They're not related. Those two are not related. What happened is that one family worked for their family, and when they had kids, when they grew up, they hooked up with each other, and that's why it seems incestuous. It's not incestuous. It's just that the family wasn't told with each other for a long time from Puerto Rico and so forth. And this is exactly why you have people who have those similar names. You see Anita Case pop up all the time. You see, instead of seeing Morales out there in Puerto Rico, you see Cruz, Viridian Cruz. And my dad himself was not fully Puerto Rican. A lot of people think, well, he was fully Puerto Rican. No, it's not true. He was Puerto Rican, and his father was Basque. That means that his father was Romanian that lived in Spain. Those people are called Basque. They're gypsies, to be honest with you. So he was half gypsy and half Puerto Rican. So, we're not too far apart. I basically still my dad. We're still related by blood. We even look like each other. So it didn't bother me too much. But finding out I was not Latino hurt me a lot. I really identified with it, and then I found out I was. I took 3 tests. I took one that was $280. It was a lot of money. One for everything, paternal, mitochondrial. I did this at Palos Hills Hospital on the basement, the lower floor, and that's really when I had to accept everything. It was my 3rd test, and I had to accept my the identification. So it was a hard thing to accept, but it proved without a doubt that this dark history, this dark family heritage was true. So so as these 3 DNS prove I'm probably the biological son to my mother's youngest Swedish and Romanian half-sister, Fantasma Jorek, but was raised almost exclusively by Doreen Rosengren, okay? By Doreen. So I knew this woman, Fantasma, only as my godmother. They said she was my godmother, and they called her Fatima. Then that's just simply the English translation from Fantasma, okay? That's from Sama. From Swedish Sama. That's what it's translated into, Fatima. But her real name is Fantasma. That's a really strange name. It's like people think it means a ghost. You're like a ghost or something. No, it just means light. That's what it means. I mean, a light spirit. In other words, you're a light-hearted spirit. That's what Fantasma means. So she was hidden in plain sight and living literally right next door to my house, not once but twice. And once on my house on 22nd and Sawyer, and once on 19th and 11th. Okay, she was very kind to me as a child, and she would try to care for me during the brief times between her many travels. Okay, she was obsessive with psychological witchcraft, and she would take over people's covens from different countries and states. So that's what she was. She would also accumulate a lot of money from this as well. So I didn't believe any of it at first, and when I investigated, it was all quite easy to prove once you know where to look, which is true today. And now it makes sense as there are no photos of my mom, Doreen ever being pregnant with me, and because she never was. And those that say they knew her pregnant with me from years past simply mistake that for my brother Papu, who is just barely 1 year older than me. So in other words, people go, no, I know, I seen when she was pregnant with you. That's not true. What happened is when you seen her pregnant, she was actually pregnant with my brother Papu. He's not even just barely 1 year older than me. But another thing that really explains it was because Phantasmagoric is, once she has the baby, she's deported. And then guess what happens? It's almost the same thing that happened to Beth and Peter and all them happened to me again, but much, much later. Was, Phantasma was deported. She had it, and she had to take care of me as a child, as a newborn, and that's exactly what happened. So it appears that I'm actually her son, but I'm really her nephew. She's raising me as her son until she gets back to Serbia. Okay, so that's some pretty dark stuff, but it's true. Okay. So that gave the impression that she was indeed my birth mother. So ironically, the exact thing happened a few times earlier with my elder brothers and siblings, with Anita Case, to which her name still exists on birth certificates. So Anita Case, like if you look at Beth and Peter and Margaret's certificates, you see that their birth certificates originally have their original mother, Anita Case. So yeah, it explains why Anita Case is on their birth certificates as their mom, because she is their mother. So they think that Doreen and Anita Case are the same person. They're not. That's her older sister. That's what's going on. Okay, so in conclusion about these things, if these things are fairly easy to prove, they're fairly easy to prove. They're just, why does my family all believe totally different origin stories? So my family, they believe that they don't believe anything I say. They probably think they're schizophrenic, but they believe other stories. Each one made their own story. So how many families do you know where everybody says, well, my mother's this or my father? You're a very extremely weird family because nobody agrees as to who is who. They're, oh, your father is this or your family is that. Yeah, that's not the case. So in other words, Gina, Papu, Linda, me, even from my inner family, and then my extended family, nobody agrees on the family origin. Everybody has a different story as to who their father is and to who their mother is. I don't know any family in the history that's like that, except for us. And we still argue it. Even when they see this video and I say these things, the things I'm saying, you can go check them up. Half of the shit you can Google. You'll find out this is true. So this is the easiest question to answer as far as why do they not simply do that? And it's because they're frightened and ashamed. And there is a lot of stuff to be scared of. And there is a lot of stuff I'm not even talking about here. And there's a lot of stuff to be ashamed of. So if you're 50 years old, over 50, and then you find out your family ain't your family, and then you find out why they're not your family, why you turn out to be a nephew or a cousin or something, and you're wondering why they never told you this when they were alive, then you go search it, you start digging, and then once you start digging into that family history, you just find out scoops and shovelfuls of horror, just pure frightening. You got terrible enemies, occults, occult beginnings. This would scare somebody white in the face. You go and start digging into your family history, and you find out you're a part of these very extremely taboo things that people, especially in a politically sensitive world that we live in, you'd be an outcast if somebody found out that you were connected to it. That's why I'm so careful about me talking when I make this blog about. I'm putting who's who, but I'm very careful about why those things are done. And the reason why is because if they get connected with some of those horrible things in the past, it's not like something you find out and you can get over. You can't get over it because then people are going to mark you down forever until you die. Until the day you die, if people find out that you're connected to some of these things, they're going to be judging you forever. Yeah. Unless you're like somebody like me, because I'm already accused of so much stuff. It doesn't matter to me. But for people trying to live a normal life, you could throw that normal life out the window. You're never gonna live a normal life one more day in your life if people can associate you with some of the things that and incidents and all these things that happen in their past. And that's why, this is exactly why my dad Pedro and my mom Doreen, the ones that raised me, this is exactly why they never told us about things and they covered it up, because they knew that if we were to get associated with some of the things they had, we would never get past it. I'll never get past being associated with Phantasma, Yorick, and Dunning, because I had enemies that just blabbed all of that out, and until the day I die, people will go, "Oh, this guy has some kind of connection with Dunning and the mass graves." Not really. My mother's the one who blew the whistle on that. But for some reason, it's such a horrible thing. They're always going to go, "Well, there's Dark Riddle, it has something to do with Dunning." I have to live that I have to live with that stuff until I die. For example, that ain't nothing compared to stuff that's in the past. So why do my family don't want to accept the things I'm saying, and why don't they research it themselves? Hey, you can take a public, jump on the internet, go to Chicago Reed Hospital, go to Dunning, then they'll just divert you to the Department of Human Services and all that, and bingo, there you go. There's an 80 case. There's her records. There you go. Ooh, guess who owned that business? There's all kind of stuff that you can find out. None of it is comforting. All of it is frightening. All of it's frightening. All of it. But it's still fascinating. Fascinating not only to the family, fascinating to a lot of people who shouldn't be fascinated by it. Psychologists with bad intentions, weird aldermen with strange, got a beef. They have a chip on their shoulder from something my mother did. Did to them. In the 1970s. Just get mad about stuff that my mom, put them in a bad situation in the 1970s where they're doing nasty, bad things. Corrupting people. And then get mad. Oh, you're her son. Oh my God! I'm trying to get back at you now. You see what I'm talking about? This is the reason why my family can't really be associated with them, because the problems from the past are not just staying in the past. They're reaching out from the past and affecting people in the future. Okay, so we talked about all that, and I'm not going to get more into it. It's been over an hour, and believe me, I'm doing this video as a retread for when I start to write a book. I could watch this video, and I could use my video blog here as a marker for the book that I'm going to write next year. Of course, that's going to have a lot more than the video, but it's really for one thing. It's for two things. One of them to clear up some of the bad name that Doreen and Pedro Morales had. Now, I'm going to say something about Doreen and Pedro. They're my dad and my mom. If they're not my biological dad and mother, they're either my aunt or my uncles. And they raised me since my birth. I was raised right from the freaking hospital. So they're my dad. Not only they're not like foster parents. They're so close to the DNA that I would pop up. When you take a DNA test, they can't pinpoint who your dad is. They pinpoint the closest relation is. That's what they do. And I'm so closely related to them, they could easily pass even in the DNA as my mom and my dad, because they're my uncle. So if your mother died, and you take a DNA test with your aunt, the person who takes the DNA test are going to say, "Oh, this person is your mom, or she's very closely, maybe a sister or mother." That's how DNA works. It doesn't work in precision like that, the way people think it does. And that's Astro.com. You can forget that. That's garbage. You want a DNA test, you got to go to a hospital and get it. Don't go for that. That's silliness. You spit in a tube and you expect to get a grand history. Come on, man. It don't work that way. You got to get your paternal DNA, your mitochondrial DNA. You got to get to pick the hair out of your head, and do your fingernails, do the skin in your nose and your tissue, your cheeks, and all that. And then a blood test. They draw your blood, and then you find out who you are. That's how you do it. It costs money, but that's who you really find out who you are physically, scientifically. All right. So I'm covered. This is the only thing I have to say as well is that their way of living transferred onto me, obviously, there's a big, 400-pound gorilla in the room that looks like me now, that you can't ignore, and that has to do with my children. I'm gonna have to bring this out right away because you can't really ignore it. So I have estranged children. I have children that uh, I was with younger Wakani witches, because we had things in common. And when I was with them, I had, they were good friends, really good friends to me, and I ended up having babies with them. All right, a few. Okay, part of their life cycle is taking the children away from me, and then bringing them when they're older. Okay, I don't agree with that. That hurted me when I was a kid. I had a son with a normal woman, a son, and she took off with this kid. I chased him down in Aurora. I chased him down. This guy didn't want to have nothing to do with me. He doesn't want to have anything to do with me. He probably is not my son, actually, when I think about it, because she was messing around with another guy at the same time. And I talked to that other guy, and he told me that, he said that was his kid, and he looks just like him. So I'm like 99.9% I'm not this guy's father, but I did raise him for 2 years. Okay, I raised him as a toddler for 2 years. So that guy, people say, oh, well, I wonder what happened to him. Well, that's what happened to him. He's probably not my son. Um, 4 girls. Okay, so I had twins with a woman, and she moved to Serbia, and she had twins, and one of them was Farina, and then another one they said died when she was 4 years old. A woman named Helena. And I don't know. I thought for a long time I thought this. I met a girl named Helena and befriended her on the internet. I should have told her up front what was going on. I thought that she might be my daughter because I have some relation with the family there, but I can't really talk about that because look how deep and dark my family is. But she's probably not my daughter. The one who they said that Farina survived and the other one didn't survive. She had died when she was 4 years old. So I don't know if Helena is my daughter or she's not. I don't know. Maybe she's not. If she says she's not, I'm not. So Arcadia, yeah. I know. I thought she wasn't. I took the DNA test. That's like I did with Farina. Well, they forced me to take a DNA. The state forced me to take a DNA. So I took the DNA, and I thought for sure Arcadia was not going to be mine because she don't look like me. But she did turn out. She looks a lot like my mom. A lot like Fantasma. And then so they knocked on a door. One came when she was 11 years old, just by herself. She tried to tell me she was my daughter. She wasn't sure at that time. Then later on she popped up when she was 24 years old, and Arcadia popped up when she was 20, and they both were like, hey, you're don't try to run from me. What? You're my dad probably, and I knew Farina was mine when I looked at her. I knew that, but the other one I was like, well, she don't look like me, but they turned out to be, but that was years ago. That's almost 10 years ago now. And I did my part as a dad, and we got a very good relationship. We do the same activism, the same epistemology, witchcraft and all that. We do the same things. So that's why we're a lot of times where people say things about us. They say us in a group. That guy and those 2 girls. But it's because they live the Wakani lifestyle the way that my mother and my mother's sister lived that lifestyle. That's why the family is such a mess. Their mothers lived the same lifestyle, and this is the reason why I have children that pop up all of a sudden that you never know. And they're like, or I have children, and then all of a sudden my children just seem to disappear. Well, he had a kid, for 1 or 2 years, and the kid is gone. You know what I mean? And then then you go, well, all of a sudden I have 2 daughters, and they'll be like, adults already. And where do these people come from? Well, because they're living the Wakani life cycle. They live in the life cycle. They get raised by the mother, and then at a certain age, they're the father's responsibility. When they get older, they be taught these things. Um, that's been going on for hundreds of years, man. And my part of the family, you know, the Rosengren, the Jureks, and you know, Case family. And of course, you can see those names. They're written on. My family has all those names. So, wow, because I'm at the end of this blog now, and I'm looking at it. It's an hour and 14 minutes that I've been talking. 1 hour and 14 minutes. And I'm going to use this. This is good for the book. I'm going to this is what I'm going to recall on this blog right here when I start writing the book. A lot of it, in conclusion, because I'm going to end this. None of this stuff is really evil. None of it. So you get people like when I told you I had a problem with these psychologists and so forth, and people that hate epistemology. And there's a lot of people who hate what we're doing. They look at the family and they demonize my family. I mean, dude, a lot. They make up a lot of horrifying, despicable lies about me and my family. And this is one of the reasons why I'm making this blog, is because you can hear it from me. I mean, even my older half, my older, she said she was my half sister, she's like my cousin. Even she was demonizing my dad and my mother. She was saying that they were selling babies and that they adopted them out because she herself did not know the history. So when you get people, strangers who are interested in epistemologic mental alchemy, they're interested in the Templars, they're interested in the Wakani. These are not my family. These are just people who've been interested in these strange cults for years. Their mother and their father have been interested in it, and then they themselves make up their own stories. So what would happen if I did not talk in a blog? What would happen if I wasn't writing my own story? If I wasn't writing my family history accurately from me? Okay, people would believe everything that these people say. That was totally inaccurate. So when people say, "Why are you talking about so much personal stuff on a public blog?" I don't have a choice. Okay, first of all, if I don't speak up, people are going to believe everything that these half-wit psychologists that have they want to be enemies to all Wakani and Templar. Family members that are disgruntled, making up their own stories, just lying. They're just flat out lying, making up their stories. And other people, just strange people that are in the occult. There's a lot of people who are a lot of followers from the occult. Most of them I get along with. But these people write about my family history and my mother's and my dad and Mr. Pete, who was in a ghetto selling beer. Oh, well, he was a drug dealer. He wasn't a drug dealer. Come on, man. We sold beer. But I'm trying to say is that what happens is that they make up their own stories. If I don't write the story, if I don't write the articles that I write, and I don't make the blogs that I make, everybody, the public would believe their lies, their nonsense, because you don't see it coming directly from the horse's mouth. Me. Okay, so I'm forced to make this blog. If I don't make this blog, something horrible will happen to our reputation. So I don't even have a choice. I have to make the blog because no one else will, which is the reason why I'm going to write the book next year. I'm a little bit mentally disturbed by some of it, because when you find out about these huge psychological disturbances in your history, they affect you. You just see, in other words, you're living your normal life, and then you see people from, you never seen before just pop up out of nowhere and say, "Oh, I'm your brother," or whatever. And then you different cults that say, "Well, you got to be so much. You owe this to us because your parents did that." Bad psychologists, professional people that want to demean you and try to exploit you. You see things like that, and it's gonna hurt you. It's gonna hurt your mind. You're going to need time to heal your mind, and then look at me. I have a brain disease. I have a brain disease from high blood pressure, which is kind of cool. I could just say this is all schizophrenic, couldn't I? I could just say this is a schizophrenic fantasy, except that it's all easy to prove. I would love to say, oh, well, there's no such thing as Dunning. Oh, there's no such thing as a mass grave. Who's going to believe there's 28,000 people buried on a grave in Chicago? No one's going to believe that. But unfortunately, those kind of things are true. All you have to do is Google. So, but the point is that those the truth of the history of the family is not really all that horrible. It's just fascinating, and there's so much good things that come out of it. And I'm going to talk about those good things when I write the book. So, in the end, I hope you understand. This is not a guy blabbing about personal things in his family. This is a guy who's forced, to get the record straight before he dies. And I'm talking about me. So, in other words, before I die from this, brain disease, which will eventually kill me, I need to get the story straight. And it's a complicated story. It's a little scary. It's a little bizarre. But in the long run, it's really, really, really unique. And there's a lot of good that comes out of it. We count on that, Doc.